Jesus says he's come to bring fire. Well, that's no surprise. We had it in the past few weeks, did we not? With temperatures of 100 degrees and more. But this is a gospel that is really hard. I was hoping I wouldn't get this one in my in my number of readings and sermons. Jesus is being really tough here. He says, I came to bring fire on the earth, and I have come to bring division. This is not the Jesus that we're accustomed to hearing about. We're used to hearing about love and justice and peace. But as the slogan often used in protests, no justice, no peace, I believe that's what Jesus is trying to say to us. If you think about those words carefully, it means if there is no justice, there can be no peace. In other words, I'm going to fight until justice is achieved. We, of course, know nothing of division in our country. You're supposed to laugh there. I remember when I was a baby priest, my first parish, and my name, as you know, is Caggiano, which is Italian. The senior warden came up to me, and I was discussing with him that perhaps we should have a meeting in the evening of a committee. And he said, oh, we here in Everett, it was in Everett, we don't go out in the evening ever since the Italians arrived in Everett. I didn't take the bait. But we do have these divisions, and they're completely obvious to us. I have workmen at my house doing work, and I overheard one workman this week saying, oh, well, we know what's going on. The Democrats have had a conspiracy since the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I thought, oh my goodness, that is really a how do I want to say, different opinion than anything I have ever thought. So, but we can put that aside, and we don't choose to argue because the argument really generally doesn't lead anywhere. But the more important argument that is happening right now is in our Anglican Communion. Now, I'm going to bore you with some details about our church because many of you already know this, but some of you may not. The American Episcopal Church is part of the Anglican Communion. In other words, we began from the Church of England. And we are called a communion, that's a very important word, not a denomination, the way the other traditions are named, because the Anglican Communion includes countries all over the world, in India, in Africa, in all the nations, in Africa, wherever the English had conquered, that is where an Anglican church lives. And every 10 years, all of the bishops from all of the churches all over the world convene in Lambeth, at the Lambeth Palace in England. And when they do that, they discuss what it is that the Anglican Communion stands for. Now, let me give you an example. back in 1897, the big issue that was argued was about polygamy. Now, for us Americans, that is a no-brainer. But if you gather together with people from a tradition in Africa, for example, where men have many wives, and that is part of the culture, if that community is included in the Anglican Communion, what does that mean? And that is what the bishops argue. In 1930, believe it or not, the hot issue was contraception. The Episcopal Church was in agreement with what the Roman Catholics were saying, that using the pill is against God's law. Well, that has changed. We have the Anglican Communion reversed our thinking over decades. That means we have had to do what is really the best of what I think of as the Anglican Communion, and that is agree to disagree. Today, the Lambeth Conference of this year just finished. And in that Lambeth Conference, we had a very difficult time. 125 of the Anglican bishops were against the practice of homosexuality and marriage and ordination of homosexuals. First, I should say there were 650 bishops gathered, and 125 were opposed to what the American Church and others were proposing. So there's a group within the Anglican Communion called the Global South Fellowship of Anglican Churches. Bear with me, this is not going to be completely boring. But there is a primate not in terms of monkey. There is a primate called Justin Badi, who is from southern Sudan, who actually said, "We cannot break bread with bishops who betray the Bible." And that is a very difficult controversy that we are working on today. Now, we might say, what did our Archbishop of Canterbury say? Well, the Archbishop Justin Welby was reluctant to hold Anglican priests and bishops accountable for their opinion, which means that he did the both and accepted both sides of the issue. So when Jesus says, "I have come to bring conflict," now we really can understand. We are living it. You don't have to watch the news very long before you understand that this conflict is everywhere. So where are we today? Who are we? And how do we find comfort from Jesus? How do we find love in all of this? And how do we find hope? And I want to offer an idea. I believe that Jesus knows our struggles, and that he asks us not to escape conflict, but to listen, to pray, to hope, and most of all, to use wisdom to come to our convictions. I believe that true happiness comes through serenity, and serenity comes from our convictions that live in the wisdom of our hearts and minds. And that requires openness. It requires us to listen. It requires us to accept things that are changing and to know that there are changes, there are variables, and that we are called to live into them, not escape. So we have this wonderful prayer that many of you, probably all of you, know, and that is the Serenity Prayer. And I'm going to read it slowly because I think it's the most profound message we have ever received in a prayer. The prayer goes like this: Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And the prayer, you know, goes on. I'm going to pick out one phrase: accepting hardship as a pathway to peace. I know many of us, most of us, myself included, we want to escape conflict. Some of us get into a conflict and we just say, oh, I gotta go, and we disappear. But the truth is, we have to face it. And we have words of wisdom from our, looking for my notes, from our message in the Hebrews passage that was read this morning. Remember this. By faith, it says, the people passed through the Red Sea as if it were dry land. But when the Egyptians attempted to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after they had been encircled for several days. So we, in the Anglican Communion, we who sit here, we who are called to deal with conflict every day, are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses who ask us to lay aside the weight of sin, the weight of our anger, and to cling closely to God and run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Jesus showed his own courage by saying, you think I've come to bring peace, I've come to bring conflict. Jesus said that because you don't change anything without some bit of conflict. It's part of the picture. When we deny that, when we push it aside, when we pretend it's not there, we're not solving any problems. We have to take courage and understand that Jesus took tremendous courage to make sure that we could live together in peace. And we will, when we learn to accept the things we cannot change the things we can, and use wisdom to know the right way. Amen.